Welcome to the Hohman Design podcast. I'm Tom Hohman. In our inaugural episode, we're here with Luke Smith and Kevin Strait. They're a couple of people who are super important to all the things we do here, consulting with us on all of the projects we do, and dear friends as well. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, glad to be here.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about how we all got our start in making. Whatever it is. So for some of us, we may fancy ourselves designers, others engineers, certainly all creative problem solvers, nonlinear thinkers, makers, whether it's personally or professionally or both. So maybe, Luke, do you mind telling us how you got started and take us through kind of your present journey?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Richmond, Virginia, and I still live here. Love it. It's a great place. It's a good small town with some good resources also. I was homeschooled from 4th grade on through high school, and then went to community college and then university. I was also blessed to have my father, along with my mother, teaching myself and my siblings at home. My father worked from home as a designer of electronic control systems, mostly industrial control systems. So the whole family was all in one place all the time. And my father was the kind of guy who was constantly tinkering with things and trying to see how they worked and design new ways of doing things, electronic and mechanical. And he was and is extremely patient and would put up with my constant questioning and how does this work, how does that work, and eventually he'd get to the end and he would say, I don't know, pretty well, when I asked how something works. But he took the time to really invest in me being a technical generalist. And if you ask him today, he'll tell you exactly that the people that are marketable in today's economy are people that can abstract out a little bit and look at the big picture and say, I don't necessarily know enough to design a car engine, but I understand how it works. And I understand how to interface it with the next thing. And I understand general systems and how they interact. And I'm not super specialized in any one thing. He deliberately set out to teach myself and my siblings, my brother and my sister, to be generalists in life and to learn about how things work and how to work on things, how to build things, how to make things, and how to get by without a lot of store-bought, so to speak, solutions to things. We had a lot of raw materials laying around, things that he had collected over the years, various electronic bits and pieces and wood and metal materials. The one thing we didn't have a lot of was really good tools. I think if I could go back magically in my time machine, I'd probably give myself a milling machine or a lathe or some kind of a machine that could do precise cutting and shaping of materials. Because I was always filing things and cutting things with the wrong kind of saw blade and drilling.
The scars to show it.
I was trying to take one of my Estes model rockets, and I had a big 4-inch PVC pipe I was trying to turn into a shoulder-mounted rocket launcher.
Right, yeah.
And the pistol grip that I made for it that was going to contain a 9-volt battery, a safety, and an upside-down toggle switch as a trigger. I took that. I wanted it to be shaped. I mean, like an Olympic pistol, fully contoured.
Sure.
Shape. So I had to do it by drilling like 100 holes
and then
on
jigsawing
each
them
side,
together.
And then kind of trying to break them all into it. And it ended up being the most raggedy piece of garbage ever.
Yeah, I know that. So my brother was more into the physical making of things. I was more into the electronic making of things. I would do things like make a circuit that would send an audio signal over a laser beam, that kind of thing. My brother was the kid out forging blades in the backyard with a coal coal forge, making crossbows and that
Your
kind of thing.
sister was making dresses and making
making yarn and felt from
Yeah.
fiber,
Oh,
that kind of
cool.
thing. So we were very makey as a family, but he would provide for us, and my mom would give us the freedom to, during being homeschooled, the freedom to do kind of whatever we wanted to within reason, and explore the things we wanted to learn. So we would go to the library, and I'd go over into the 700 series book, which is all technical, tradey kind of stuff in the Dewey Decimal System. And I'd read a book about pumps, or a book about how refrigeration systems work, those kind of things, and how oil wells work, all these industrial technical things. My sister, who knows where she was, but some other section of the library. But they would just turn us loose in the library, and this was pre-internet, and we would go find interesting books and kind of cherry pick the interesting bits out of them.
That's got to be on like my top 5 favorite smells. In
The library?
The smell of
a
the library.
1980 library.
The 700 section of the library.
Right. Just a touch of a machine oil smell.
Yeah, dirty fingerprints all over the pages. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I remember reading a book about audio and books about basic machine shop work, that kind of thing. So I grew up in that kind of environment, and then when I was old enough to go to community college at 16 in Virginia, homeschoolers can go community college at 16, go get a GED and go through community college. So I went and got 2 associate's degrees by the time I was, I think, about 19, one in industrial controls and one in computer electronics, or I don't remember what they were exactly, but I never really had a clear path in school. It was always, well, one day maybe I want to do this when I grow up, and at the same time I was also getting into the work world. So by the time I was about 17 or so, I was doing a lot of telecom work with a friend of ours that we all know today, named Mike Camborian, and he would drag me along on real jobs doing data and telecom work, and so I got some exposure to the work world that way. And then I got into pro audio for a while, doing sound for big outdoor concerts in the Richmond area. And my parents in 1999 sold their house and bought a sailboat, and my sister was still too young to be on her own at that point, and my brother was off on his own. My older brother, I was the middle. So at 19, I was kind of suddenly thrust out into the world of working, and pro audio and telecom wiring work was kind of where I landed. And I got sucked into, kind of by accident, doing some telecom and data and computer work for a company that made auto parts based here in Virginia.
That was with Champ, right?
Champ,
when
yeah.
you were both young.
Yeah.
Were doing some work there?
I did some wiring work, and Kevin actually was part of that world too, doing some wiring work for that company, the auto parts company. It was called Quality International back then. So at 21, I reluctantly signed on as an employee with this company. I was thinking, you guys don't really have enough work for me to be a full-time person here. But the guy that I interacted with, his name was Mitch Bennett. He was the one running the company. He saw potential for things that I could do in the future, and that was 20 years ago. And I'm still there, a descendant of that company. It's a different ownership now and a different corporate entity, but it's same lineage of people and building and parts and brands and so forth. So now I'm still in a position with that company. I'm the IT director, and I have 3 people that, myself and 2 other people in my department. I went and finished my electrical engineering degree in 2008 at Old Dominion University, and that was a struggle because I was in the working world and working full time, and then trying to finish a engineering degree. In hindsight, if I could have done anything differently, it would have been to finish and focus and get it done and move on when I was young and energetic, and trying to be a real grown-up and do school at the same time is overwhelming. And I don't know how Kevin has done it all over the years. You did the same thing.
Yeah.
And are now doing it. You're in law school now.
It went so badly the first time. I'm doing it some more.
Right. Yeah. You finished your was it chemical or
Physics program.
physics degree? Yeah.
2014.
Yeah. So you had a really similar path as I did. Kind of a perpetual student. I have
Yeah.
enough credit hours for a master's degree, but not really well focused in one direction.
Right. Right.
I think I've got you both beat there. More credits than it takes to be a doctor, and I'm
Yes.
2 years away from any degree.
So these days, my world is becoming less technical and more about managing people and budgets and direction, strategy, that kind of thing. I still do plenty of technical things for fun, but my daily life at work is less and less being the guy that fixes the broken thing and more about being the guy that directs the strategy about how do we fix the broken thing in the future and who does what, when, where, and why. But at heart, I'm definitely when I'm at home, I'm tinkering with something or designing something for fun or for contract for somebody else.
Are you able to share with us at all about what you're doing in the association of, I have got it wrong, of auto part resellers and organizing that industry?
Oh yeah, that's an interesting area of my world.
Yeah.
The industry I'm in, one of the major facets of it is selling parts electronically. And when you go into an auto parts store and you tell the person behind the counter, I need a alternator or brake pads or whatever for my car, and they say, what is the make, model, year?
B-pipe for a Honda CRV?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Right.
They counter with, okay, well, tell me what engine it has. Tell me whether it's 4-wheel drive or 2-wheel drive. Well, that data that's part of that back and forth is painstakingly curated and created by people in my industry that are getting all this data together and pushing it down the pipeline toward that place where it's going. Specifically, in that case, the computer system that's running the counter sales at an auto parts store. And until recently, there was no good standard for it. As crazy as that sounds, it was kind of a wild west of everybody just crams their make, model, year, engine data into a spreadsheet and sends it to their trading partner, and the trading partner has to make sense of it and put it in some kind of a standard presentation to their customer downstream. So what I'm talking about is from the perspective of the part manufacturer. So if I'm the company making the brake pads, I'm not necessarily the one actually just defining what happens at the counter level or at the website level or at the professional installer level, where the professional installer has to call the supply house and order these parts. About 20 years ago, there started to emerge a standard and a trade association called AAIA, Automotive Industry Aftermarket Association, defined a data standard where we all got together and we're gonna all pay money into this research organization, and they're gonna figure out that the Ford F-150 in 2004 came with 3 engine options, and the second option was 4-wheel drive, and the third option was only 2-wheel drive. Those kind of things were all our resources as an industry of aftermarket, non-original part manufacturers were pooled in a way that we could all share the same research. So when I tell Napa or O'Reilly's or AutoZone, Advance, one of those kind of customers, when I tell them my part fits X vehicle, it's done in a standardized language. And that community of people that curates and defines the data standards for that data, it's a small community of people in our industry, and there's a professional society called, it used to be called the National Catalog Managers Association. And it's a facet of the AAIA organization. Somehow, I'm not sure how it happened, but I've find myself as the chairman of that of that society, and we have a big conference every year where about 400 people get together that have that job in their organization of getting that data together and formatting it in the right way and pushing it down the pipeline to their trading partner. In this coming spring in 2019, April of 2019, our conference where we meet in Florida, I'll be opening the conference. I'll be called upon to speak some inspirational words and introduce some keynote speakers. And I've had, as a result, that whole thing has proven to me that A, I'm not a public speaker. I need to learn how to be pretty quickly. and I guess B, the path forward for technical makery people to really go forward in their lives a lot of time, in my case anyway, is not more and better making and more clever design. It's managing other people that are making and doing and being. And
well, I've heard you strategize on the details too about developing that code to identify all those complex relationships
to sell the right part.
And I don't think it's any accident that you've filtered into the position that you find yourself in today.
Yeah. So that's kind of my path in a nutshell of how I got to where I am. And it all started with parents who sacrificed so that we could have time to make and be and explore and learn at our own pace, and we're not crammed into a mold of you're going to sit in a classroom and you're going to soak up this teaching at the same rate that all of your peers are, whether it's good for you or not. You're going to be locked in step with the rest of them. So I have to attribute all of where I am today to my parents and how they made a huge sacrifice to give me an education that was off the beaten path.
That's cool. Kev, how'd you
owe
get here?
Everything I am to my parents too, because they made me sit in that classroom and they made me stay in sync with everyone else. And I was in trouble if I didn't. No. My parents were creative people. They were industrious, I think is an even better word for it. They weren't artists. They weren't great thinkers or writers of poetry or anything along those lines. But my mother was very resourceful. She was resourceful kind of in a child of someone who was from the Depression era. So there was the ability to use the things around her, put them to very good use within the home. And my dad would fix everything. Anything that broke, it got fixed. And if it couldn't be fixed, we used whatever part of it still worked. And maybe we bought a new one and it sits right next to it. But if the thing only half broke, then it was still expected to do whatever it could still do. And home repairs, car repairs, appliances, all these kinds of things. In my childhood, I also spent time in chemistry labs. My dad was in that industry, and I spent a lot of time around this notion of this specialized room full of specialized equipment where things that are hard to do correctly, things that are dangerous, things that require special knowledge, special procedures, they all happen in a specific place and they happen in a specific way. So this idea of procedure was a part of my idea of making. I didn't feel like it took any creativity away. I didn't feel like having a 3-ring binder of instructions was somehow a limitation. I thought it was this wonderful freedom because now I know these actions really take me somewhere, which was one of the frustrations that maybe somebody would have if they're from a really artistic background. If I put all my time and talent into this and I turn the crank really hard and I really hope this works, I still might get a mess. So I liked the precision, even though it was a bit of a constraint. So I grew up in that environment, perfectly normal, public school, education, off to college. Did not go well. I spent a long time in college, and a lot of Fs, a lot of failed classes, a lot of classes I managed to withdraw from, some that I just failed because I didn't go or had some problems. And it took me about 15 years to get through school. So I went into engineering school, mechanical engineering, spent a long time chipping away at that, switched to nuclear engineering, chipped away at that, And then I realized that the shortest path out the door with a degree in anything, anywhere,
That was my calculus also. What is the
some
least
moment.
amount of credit hours?
it's like looking around for a fire exit. It's that one.
Yep.
When I did that evaluation, it was time for me to pull the plug. That's
You just walked away.
what I determined.
There were definitely times I wanted to walk away like that. But I ended up realizing that my shortest path, a shorter path than finishing engineering, was to bail out with a physics degree. So I did. And all along I was working, I had done a lot of like what Luke had described, freelance wiring and telecom work, some freelance audio work. I did a good bit of freelance CAD and CAM work, architecture, and for some specific industries, civil engineering, industrial food service. And I spent some time doing machine design and doing a little bit of process design. I get out of school. Let me back up. So I'm working professionally this whole time at a chemical company that picked me up as a laboratory technician. And I moved up through the ranks. In fact, they brought me into project management and gave me the title of engineer even before I had finished school. And I think when I got out the door with a physics degree, they were kind of frustrated because I was supposed to be an engineer. But my time in project management left me in the same position that Luke was just describing, which was you've got a creative person who knows how to make things and get things done, but that skill set includes how to organize your tasks. And if you know how to organize your tasks, maybe you know how to organize someone else's. Maybe you know how to organize 5 people. So it wasn't really a position of middle management where I only had to keep a bunch of people working, but it was a position where I'm on a team and all of us have to work together, and someone has to take all of that work and understand it well enough to account for it to the customer. And that's really the role that I fell into. I was the voice of our company into some of our clients' organizations. So I would fly to Detroit. I worked with the car makers. I'd fly to Detroit and I'd put on big technical presentations, 100 and some odd slides, and you're standing up in front of the room just explaining what we've been doing all month with your money.
And why it's not done.
And why we're not done yet, and why we need another month. And it's really interesting to see that it's a hostile crowd, but it's someone that you work with frequently. So you know them well, you know the names of their kids, you have all this friendly chatter, and yet this is their business, this is my business, there's a lot of money on the line, we can't be wrong, we're probably in trouble. So that was an interesting twist on being a maker, was going from the world of making things with my own hands, sort of being in engineering school and making my own stuff, to making things on a team where all of our parts combine, and then making a story out of that, and then making someone believe it. I know that's a stretch of the word, but that's the arc of my making as a professional. Until a few years ago, when I said, well, that was fun, but I think I'm done. And I had to go find something new.
We'll talk about the amazing year
Yeah.
on another episode,
Yeah.
I think, where we talk about the 7 careers.
I know.
between-
So after I left the chemical engineering company, the maker in me wanted to make things again. So I was making small appliances again, electronics projects. I was making machinery type components and wanting to fix things. So buying old houses and fixing them up. That kind of was really fun to do that again. And I'm glad it's over.
A few Jeeps in there.
A few Jeeps in there. It got remade. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, Kevin and I both have a Cherokee fetish.
A Jeep Cherokee.
A Jeep Cherokee fetish. Yeah, I've had 3. How many have you had?
7. Although I think I've had all 3 of your 3.
You have had all 3 of
so,
mine.
okay.
Maybe I don't know how you want to count that.
It's a shared pool. Yeah, I had a 87, a 92, and a 2000.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're great tinkerable vehicles.
Yeah. Once you have enough of them, you can always get at least one of them to leave the driveway on its own wheels.
Take 7 to have one.
It does.
I think the number's smaller than 7.
Okay,
but
3?
7's a safe bet.
All right.
But that's kind of the story of why I'm a maker and why I'm perfectly comfortable holding hand tools. I'm perfectly comfortable on a drafting table. I'm comfortable in front of a dry erase board. I'm even comfortable in front of the room being yelled at by the customer.
And CAD.
CAD, yeah. Electronic versions of all this.
And when did you pick up the electronics and
You have to.
all the
You
other
just
things
plain
that
have
you've done?
If you want the part from the milling machine, then you have to draw it, or you have to pay someone to draw it. But I didn't want to have to explain the idea to someone else. That same process is no different than explaining my idea to the software package. So you might as well just explain it to the software.
How about that? I like the make them believe.
Yeah.
I don't think that was abuse of the word. That was a rebirth of the word.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like that.
Yes.
Well, I too was blessed into a wonderful family, but a very different experience in the sense that I think I made my way through my childhood contrary, and I don't mean contrarian, although certainly I probably had that it looked that way from the outside and to my parents from time to time, but it was really just I think maybe being deeply intuitive, probably to a fault, where it was like I'm reading ahead and reading out of the books and reading different books and failing the quiz and not doing my homework and not doing all the things that my family did. So my family's big sports fans. My dad was in sales. My mom's a great teacher. And my brother was an athlete. My cousin who came to live with us for a little while was an athlete. So that was kind of the direction of our family. And like I said, that workbench didn't quite work as hard as one might think, but in our house, in our garage. And it was me alone figuring a lot of that out, but deeply driven, I think, from just an intuitive sense. And I don't really know where that comes from, but I know that it took shape in a couple of key ways. I think in 1975, I got my first Lego set. Mm-hmm. That was really influential. I think it was something my folks picked out for me with money that Grandma and Grandpa had sent, and so I had their name on it. So I've always thought that my Grandpa English, who was an architect in Illinois, the English brothers architect, I'm trying to think, they didn't design Soldier Field, or maybe it was Soldier Field at the University of Illinois in Champaign.
Wow. Yeah.
But he did teach me. So even though I think my parents picked it out or whatever, he was there that Christmas and it had their name on it. And he showed me how to dovetail Lego bricks when I was 5 years old. And I remember it to this day. And I mean, I remember the day I opened it, built it, broke it, and was rebuilding something on my own. And I think I put a bunch of 1x8 bricks together and a bunch of 1x4 bricks together and put them next to each other. And it was, just ready for disaster. And I'd do that purposely to create disaster many times in the future. But he immediately came over and showed me how to dovetail a corner so that it would be strong.
Right.
And
like a Flemish bond.
That was amazing. That was very influential. And then when I was 7, my dad took me to see Star Wars. And I remember at that time, I remember sitting in the theater, and I brought my little Y-Wing here, my Lego Y-Wing with us today, because it was when that Y-Wing was crashing into the trench, and one of it's breaking apart in the trench, and one of its pontoons breaks off, and it's disintegrating into the trench. I thought to myself, my dad does homework for a living. Somebody builds models and blows
crashes
them up for a living. And I was it. Like, I was like, that's exactly what I want to do. So I obviously hit the floors with my Star Wars action figures and my Legos, creating worlds, telling stories. I did high school stagecraft, was really my first chance to kind of get my hands dirty. We didn't have shop, but I was able to work on our school plays with a fantastic drama teacher, Mr. Taylor, and we did that. I also had some great influence in the sciences from my science teacher, Mrs. Caprio. She really indulged the creative minds of, you mentioned your brother forging swords in the backyard. A real partner in crime of mine named Jimmy had a air blower with an underground trench into his furnace,
Sure.
where he'd get that,
White hot
get
coals.
that going so that he could fold steel.
The metal,
And so Mrs. Caprio would indulge the two of us and all of our questions about unstoppable forces and immovable objects. and that stuff was all part of the endless fascination, which I think I'd identify as the key force for. So I think this word maker is used pretty liberally, and I think if it was getting at something more than making, which making really to me sounds results oriented, but there's another person who I might very well call a maker by most of what they mean, that may not get to a result but is happily engaged in the same kind of fascination, but at a theoretical level. And so I was doing that both practically and in mind with my Legos, and then going on to stagecraft. Ended up in college towards the end at Art Center College of Design briefly, where I was studying both film and industrial product design, because some of the folks in my life, Kevin, you were just looking through this Sid Mead book we have here on the table. He was the visual futurist for the movie Blade Runner and others. We have his spinner over here on the shelf from Blade Runner. That's one of my favorite pieces. But he was involved at Art Center College of Design. They have the Sid Mead Library at the library at Art Center College of Design, and I spent some time there drooling over the senior projects and just trying to get rolling there. But in the summers already, I was volunteering at the graduate level on student films, and because I was one of 8 people who showed up regularly, I was the art director of some of these student films, and while I was still in high school. But these young producers and directors went on to start their motion picture careers, and I was the person that they thought of when it came to the art department. And I immediately started working with them and never finished school as a result. And I, at a very young age, maybe a tragically young age, maybe awesomely young age, but I was a department head. And that's not true at every scale of project, but I worked mostly in commercials, where the departments can be very small, from 1 to 5 or 6 people. And I was a department head from the time I was like 18 or 19 in that capacity. And when we worked on much bigger projects, like I worked on the film Shallow Hal, and in that sense I was highly compartmentalized. I was in a position called the on-set dresser. And so I was with the set decorating team, and I was there babysitting what the swing gang would come in front of us and come take out behind us, and I was with the unit. We'd arrive, and I'd move everything out of the way of the camera and then move it all back when we turned around and looked the other direction. So so that, depending on the scale of the project, I'm bouncing back and forth through my whole career. And then 20 plus years into it, there was a chance to work some in theater. There was a chance some to work in the music industry, a chance to work in theater and live events. Finally, I ended up working on some mega projects, like if you've heard of things like Oprah's 50th birthday party or something. I didn't work on that specifically, but I think I worked with some of the same party planners of that event and events like it. And that was I call that the end of my film career, mostly because it was some former colleagues who had left the film industry and gone to work in the events business who had taken on a project that was maybe getting away from them, and they said, we have some friends in the film industry that do this kind of thing. So they called, and I remember going into that meeting, and I mean, I should have known this wasn't my problem. This wasn't my. But I just was like, man, bad things happen if I walk out of this room, and I just felt it. And so I said, I need a couple telephones, and we're gonna need lunch. And I never left the meeting. And we started about 13 days of construction to do a $250,000 build out on an event tent for a wedding reception, and another couple weeks on site installing that with a huge crew, the biggest crew I had ever managed at that point, bigger than on any film I had done. So, but that was it. Kind of had the best and worst of some of what I think I had maxed out, on in the film industry, and so I decided to leave that, and I wanted to. Actually, I was courting the space industry for a couple years. And you guys kind of know, I speak frequently of space is what's next, which is kind of a famously infrequent endeavor of mine, where I kind of promote space as the next endeavor of.
I think you're right.
The next paradigm of human endeavor,
Mm-hmm.
And I know you're in the boat. You're in the boat with me.
Expansion.
So,
yeah.
So I was lobbying Congress for space. I was talking to some folks at Virgin Galactic, talking to some folks also at their complex, the Sir Norman Foster designed Spaceport New Mexico, or Spaceport America, is it called? Confusing
I know
it
which
with
one you're thinking of.
the Formula One track in Austin, Texas, is maybe called the Circuit of the Americas. But nonetheless, courting space, I ended up at that same time kind of taking a year's sabbatical to work on fine arts projects that had kind of been building up in my mind towards the end of my film career. And I was looking for studio space to conduct all the things I had planned, and ended up landing in Richmond after not being able to find big, affordable studio space at some smaller towns in the region. And so ending up in Richmond was great, though, because I plugged into a fantastic community. I like to call Richmond the Portland of the East Coast, in the sense
Portland
that
of the Atlantic.
maybe Portland is to Seattle as Richmond, Virginia is to Brooklyn, New York. It's this crunchy, uber creative, largest arts program in the country here at VCU.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Is it? Wow.
Did not know that.
And you feel it. I feel it scattered throughout everywhere.
You do.
Restaurateurs, small business owners that are involved in arguably the commercial arts seem to be practicing them at another level that borders the fine art, if not intermingles with the fine arts. And so the town is art infused, and it was a great place to land as an artist and a thinker. And I started getting some requests from people who knew me and knew what I was capable of to do some industrial design for them. And some of the stuff I wanted to spool up and get at the end of that year of art projects was some of my own furniture designs and some other kind of technology integrated furniture pieces. And I realized that a design firm would be the perfect place to marry my prior experience with my new personal goals, and would be the umbrella under which I could entertain the client work that was coming to me, and the client work I could solicit from then on. So that's how we got here to Hohman Design, and that's been 8 years, if you can believe it.
Wow.
Yeah.
We've been here becoming friends.
Yeah.
So
wow.
And it's been wonderful.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, obviously, I can definitely say there's not a thing that the firm has accomplished that wasn't informed by the both of you in an inseparable to an inseparable degree. So I'm very grateful.
Even when we didn't agree with each other.
But thanks for being here today, and thanks for being a part of everything we do. And we'll look forward to doing this again soon.